Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Sadashiva Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavatpadam Shankaram Loka Shankaram Sadatmadhyan Niratam Vishayebhyah Parang Mukham Naumi Shastreshu Nishnatam Chandrasekhara Bharatim. In the previous session, we were looking at the commentary to verse number 8. And the verse is Ato Vimukte Prayateta Vidvan Sanyasta Vahyartha Sukhasprihassan Santam Mahantam Samupetya Deshikam Tenopadishtartha Samahitatma. And we were looking at page number 7. In that, we had just finished the first line Ananya Prokte Gatiratra Nasti Aniyan Hyatakyam Anupramanat. इत्यादि श्रुतिभ्यः तादृशादेव गुरोः संशयभावनादि विरहित शुद्धात्मबोधस्य संभवात्. We had looked at that sentence. Essentially, Jagadguru Srimad Chandrasekhara Bharati Mahaswamigal is saying that because the nature of the Atma is so subtle, the knowledge of the Atma being very, very subtle, Anupramanat Aniyan, and because it is beyond reason, Atarkyam, apart from learning it, knowing it through a guru who has himself realized Brahman and therefore is identical with Brahman. And he does not view Brahman as an object, as an Anya, he views Brahman as himself. He is an Ananya. And Ananya Prokte Gatiratra Nasti, apart from such a guru who has realized Brahman himself and has therefore become Brahman, there is no other means to know the self. And therefore, Tadrishadeva Guroho Samshaya Bhavanadi Virahita Shuddhatma Bodhasya Sambhavat. The clear cognition, direct knowledge of the self is only possible from such a guru. And only such a knowledge will be free from doubts that are possible. Continuing, Yuktam hi etate lokepi asmavihi adrishto margah drishtatan margaihi kila bodhaniyah swayameva kathanchin labdhopi samshayah drishtatattvaihi kila nirasaniyo bhavati. This is quite appropriate also because even in our everyday transactions, if we don't know the route to a particular place, we ask for help from someone who has been there already. And even if we have somehow found out the means to go to a place, the route to go to a place, any doubts about it, we seek to resolve from somebody who has been there and therefore who knows the route properly. So, similarly, when we want to know the self and we don't know what it is clearly, we have to seek the help of somebody who already knows it. And therefore, it is quite appropriate. This is what he is saying. Tatra Shukajanaka Pramanam Janmantarakೃತ Sukrita Paripakavashat Swayam Gyatagyeyopi Pitranushishtopi Mahanubhavino Janakasya Vaidehasya Vachanat Kila Brahmani Vishranta Manaso Bhut Shuka iti Vasisthadau Smaryate. Now here Acharya is quoting the Yoga Vasishtha for support, wherein there is a conversation between Shuka Maharishi and Janaka, wherein Shuka Maharishi is firmly anchored in Brahman as a result of his conversation with Janaka. So what happens here is that Shuka Maharishi, who already knew whatever is to be known, he was Gyatagyeyaha, as a result of all the punya that he had accrued from his past births, and because he had been taught well by his own father Vyasacharya. So Vyasacharya's son was Shuka Brahman, and even though he already knew what was to be known, his mind was firmly anchored in the self only after a conversation with Janaka, who was himself a great Jnani, and he was a supremely realized being himself. And therefore, what Acharya is quoting from this example is that even if one knows, somehow is able to arrive at Brahman, for one to be firmly anchored in Brahman, for one to have that jnana nishtha, that is only possible by someone who himself is a jnana nishtha, who is himself firmly anchored in Brahman. And the conversation between Shuka Maharishi and Janaka in this regard from the Yoga Vasishtha is recorded by Acharya here. तथा च sadrupa brahma bhinnatvat sadrupatvam deshikasya. Therefore, the teacher himself is called Sat or Santam because he is non-different from Brahman, which is of the nature of Sat. That's what Acharya is saying here. Continuing, Ata eva mahatvam vivechita kosha panchakatvat aparichinnatvam. Just like he is called Santam, he is also called Mahantam. And here he is called Mahan because he is not limited to the five koshas. He has intellectually separated himself, the self, from the Pancha Koshas or the five sheaths. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, the Atma is described as Pancha Kosha Vilakshanam or distinct from the five sheaths. The most gross one is the Annamaya Kosha, which is this physical body, Sthula Shariram. Now, subtler than the Sthula Shariram is the Pranamaya Kosha, which is the sheath which corresponds to the movements in the prana. Essentially, all the internal systems they are functioning, the respiratory system, the circulatory system, the digestive system, the excretory system, all these systems are operational because of prana. And the functioning of these is governed by prana. And so, therefore, the pranamaya kosha is also connected closely with the physical body. Subtler than the pranamaya kosha is the manomaya kosha or the mental sheath, which corresponds to the mind. So all the emotions such as anger, desire, etc. correspond to the mental sheath or manomaya kosha. Subtler than the manomaya kosha is the vijnanamaya kosha or the sheath of the intellect, which corresponds to the ability to decide, make decisions, analyze, and arrive at conclusions. So that is the intellect. And subtler than the Vijnanamaya Kosha is the Anandamaya Kosha, which corresponds to the experience of bliss. So, for example, the bliss that is experienced in deep sleep, etc., corresponds to the Anandamaya Kosha. Or even in like when we have different kinds of experiential happiness, when we get the object of our desire, when we experience it, etc., all the various gradations of happiness that we experience is because of the vrittis in the Anandamaya Kosha or cognitions in the Anandamaya Kosha. And subtler than the Anandamaya Kosha is the self itself. And therefore, what Acharya here is saying is that the basis for the limitation of the self is the association with the upadhi or the adjunct. Once one has distinguished the self from these upadhis, from these pancha koshas, one becomes completely aparichinnam or limitless. Therefore, all the limits that apply to the upadhi that one was mistakenly superimposing upon oneself, one becomes free from that. And therefore, the guru who is a brahmagyani and a brahmanishtha, he has realized that he is beyond the limitations of these five sheets. And therefore, he is called Mahan. Santam Mahantam is the a phrase that is used in the original verse. Continuing, यद्वा शास्त्रोक्त समस्त सद्गुण मंडितत्वं वक्ष्यते हि श्रोत्रियो वृजिनो कामहतो यो ब्रह्मविदुत्तमः अहेतुक दया सिंधुर बंधुरानमतां सताम् ब्रह्मण्युपरतः शांतो निरिंदिनवानलः इत्यादि गुणजातम्. Acharya is giving another interpretation of the word Mahantam. Here he is saying that the word can refer to the guru possessing all the virtues that have been described in the Shastra. In the Vivekachudamani itself, there will be various adjectives that are used for the Acharya. So, for example, in the 34th verse, Shrotriyo Vrijino Kamahato Yo Brahma Viduttamaha. So, here it is saying that the Guru is a Shrotriya, he is well versed in the Shruti, he is Avrijinaha, he is without any defects or blemishes, he is Akamahataha, he is unafflicted by any desires, he is Brahma Viduttamaha, he is the one who has realized the Brahman. Ahetuka Dayasindhu Bandhuranamatam Satam. He is someone who bestows his grace upon his Shishyas without expecting anything in return. Normally, when we are compassionate or do good to others, there is a selfish motive behind that. We expect something in return from him. Whereas the Guru is a Ahetuka Daya Sindhu. He is a river of compassion who is naturally bestows his compassion upon others without expecting anything back from them. He is Bandhuranamatam Satam. That is for all those Sat, all those good people who approach him with humility and offer namaskaras to him. He is like a Bandhu. He removes their afflictions, he removes their mental difficulties, and he is like their relative. He is their refuge. He is Brahmani Uparatah Shantah Nirindhina Ivanalah. Having withdrawn into Brahman, abiding in Brahman, he is eternally at peace. He is like a fire that smolders even without fuel. The example that is given here is a very beautiful one. The Guru is like the fire that is burning without any fuel. Now, when we look at all worldly fire, it burns because there is fuel. And when there is fuel, the fire burns in different gradations. Sometimes it burns brightly, sometimes it burns less brightly, etc. etc. But a guru who is firmly abiding in Brahman, his mind is at peace. And this example, therefore, is describing the state of mind of such a guru, in the sense that he is providing light or wisdom to everyone, but he himself has no desires that burn, that fuel his mind. And therefore, he is Brahmani Uparatah Shantah. He is at peace in Brahman because once he has identified himself with Brahman, he has attained all his desires. There is nothing more that he desires because there is nothing else apart from himself. Because he is aparichinnam, he is limitless, there is nothing other than him for him to desire. And therefore, he is the fire that is glowing, providing knowledge, the emancipatory knowledge to his Shishyas, but he does it without expecting anything in return. He is ahetuka daya sindhu. And the reason for that is because he is akamahatah. All his desires have been fulfilled. As a result, he is nirindhana ivanalah. He is like that fire that smolders without requiring any fuel. So the alternate vyakhya for the word Mahantam in the verse is that the Guru is endowed with all these qualities and therefore he is great, unsurpassed. Continuing, Shishyebhyo Jnanam Deshati iti Deshikaha. He is then commenting on the word Deshikam in the verse. And here the word Deshika means he who gives the Upadesha or instruction to his Shishyas. Shishyebhyo Jnanam Deshati iti Deshikaha. He then comments on Tena Upadishtartha Samahitatma. And here Acharya says, Tam Samupetya Yata Vidhi Upasadya Tena Guruna Upadishto Yo Arthaha Brahmarupaha Tat Prapti Prakara Rupascha Tatraiva Samyagahitaha Atma Antahkaranam Yena Tadrisha San Vimuktei Prayateta iti Anena Mukti Ichham Vina Tatra Prayatna Sambhavat Mumukshutvam Dhvanitam. So the word samupetya is taken up. That means yatha vidhi samupetya. That is having approached the guru according to the vidhi, according to the instructions in the Veda. That is approaching him with humility, with the right attitude. Tenopadishtartha samahitatma. So here Acharya is saying Tena upadishta arthaha. Tena means by such a guru, Tena guruna upadishto yo arthaha. The teaching that has been taught by such a guru, what is the teaching? Brahma Rupaha, which is the nature of Brahman. The guru reveals the nature of Brahman as a central teaching and the means to attain it, tat prapti prakara rupascha. And by following the means that have been indicated by the guru, one understands the nature of the Brahman. And having understood the nature of the Brahman, tatraiva samyagahitaha atma antahkarana yena. His atma, in the sense here the atma means antahkaranam or the mind, whose mind has samyagahita, who has understood this self very, very clearly. Tadrisha san prayateta vimuktyai. That is, being like that, one must strive for liberation. Iti anena mukti ichham vina tatra prayatna sambhavat mumukshutvam dhvanitam. Without an intense desire for mukti, moksha ichha or mumukshutvam, there will be no prayatna or attempt at doing this. And one must strive for this. It's not merely an attempt. One must really struggle with dedication to achieve this liberation. That is what is meant here. And therefore, Acharya here is saying is that mumukshutvam or this desire for liberation is an important precondition for the knowledge of the self. उपदिष्टार्थ समाहित आत्मा इत्यनेन सततं ब्रह्म समाहित मानसत्वस्य सर्वकर्म संन्यासं विना संभवात् विवेकिना विरक्तेन स्वरूपतः सकल कर्म संन्यास पुरस्सरं ब्रह्मनिष्ठं गुरुम् उपसद्य सर्वदा ब्रह्म विचारः कर्तव्यः इत्युक्तं भवति. So Acharya is saying that the phrase Upadishtartha Samahita Atma, it means that the for the mind to be constantly contemplating Brahman and abiding in Brahman is not possible unless one has given up the notion of doership. So Sarvakarma Sannyasam Vina Asambhavat. It is impossible without one has given up doership. Because if you think about it, the mind is the receptacle for all desires, and it is desire which is the root of action and karma. So in order to give up karma, one has to give up desires also. So therefore, the sarva karma sannyasa is not achievable without giving up desires, raga and dvesha. And without giving up raga and dvesha and sarvakarma sannyasa, it is impossible for the mind to abide naturally and constantly in Brahman. And therefore, the Viveki, the one with discrimination, who's also a Virakta, who is dispassionate about sense objects, must necessarily approach one guru who is Brahmanishtha, who is abiding in Brahman naturally, Swarupataha. And after giving up all the karmas, all sense of doership and actions, Sakala karma sannyasa purasaram, Brahmanishtham guru upasadya. He must approach such a Brahmanishtha guru and constantly inquire into the nature of the self, constantly contemplate upon Brahman. Sarvada Brahma Vicharaha Kartavyaha Ityuktam Bhavati. Therefore, one must continuously contemplate upon Brahman. So, in this verse, it has been said that the one who is desirous of liberation must strive for it. And therefore, mumukshutvam is indicated. By sanyasta bahyartha sukasprahasan, vairagya or dispassion is indicated. And santam mahantam samupetya deshikam tenopadishtartha samahitatma, the samahitatma is only possible if one has a sufficiently clear mind, and therefore the shamadhi shatka sampatti is indicated. And santam mahantam samupetya deshikam, the guru is referred to as a santa and a mahanta because he has a very clear sense of viveka or discrimination between the self and the non-self. Thus, this verse contains within it indications of all the sadhana chatushtaya sampatti, the fourfold qualifications required for the ideal student. With that, we will go on to the next verse, which is verse number 9. Uddhared atmanatmanam magnam samsara varidhau yogarudhattamasadya samyak darshana nishtaya. The ninth verse of the Vivekachudamani reminds us of the Bhagavad Gita verse from the sixth chapter. Uddharet atmanatmanam na atmanam avasadayet atmaivahi atmano bandhu atmaiva ripuratmanaha. So here Bhagavan Sri Krishna is saying that both the elevation or the evolution of one's mind, improving one's own lot, or a great fall, both of them are caused by the mind itself. So it is the mind which is the means or the tool that is required to know the self. So one knows the self when ajnana or ignorance is removed by a vritti or a cognition that occurs in the mind. And that vritti is the cause for moksha. It removes avidya or ignorance. Similarly, It is the mind which is also samsara karanam. It is the same mind which binds oneself and which leads to further adhyasa and superimposition and further continuation of this never-ending sequence of births and deaths. That is also caused by the mind only, because it is the mind which causes desire, and through that desire one performs further karma, one attains further bodies to realize the benefits of those effects, to face the consequences of those effects. A similar idea is conveyed by Adi Shankaracharya here, where he is saying that one must elevate one's own mind, which is steeped in samsara, in the great ocean, samsara varidhau magnam atmanam, atmana uddharet. One must raise one's mind that is drowning in the ocean of samsara using the mind itself. And that mind which is capable of elevating oneself is the one that is samyak darshan nishtaya atmana. That is a mind which is abiding in the knowledge of Brahman. Samyak darshanam means the right knowledge. That is, one has understood the nature of Brahman and perceives that Brahman everywhere. That is, he knows that the world that is an appearance is not a reality. Its reality is Brahman itself. The world does not have any reality of its own. It is Brahman that is appearing as the world. And therefore, the Samyak Darshanam there is the right knowledge of Brahman. And secondly, what kind of Brahman? It is not something which is objective. It is not something which one perceives with one's eye as this. Rather, one perceives Brahman as I, the subject. That is the only way that one can know Brahman. That is the Samyak Darshana. One does not know Brahman as Idam, but one knows Brahman as Aham, as me, myself. And that is the Samyak Darshana, the mind that has realized that knowledge and is firmly embedded in that knowledge, has attained the state of Yoga Rudatvam. The term Yoga Rudatvam also occurs in the sixth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, in fact, in the very previous verse. So the fifth verse was Uddharet Atmanatmanam na Atmanam Avasadayet Atmaiva hi Atmano Bandhuhu Atmaiva Ripuratmanaha. The previous verse, the fourth verse, is Yadahi Nendriyartheshu na karmasu anushajjate sarvasankalpa sannyasi yoga rudaha tadochyate. So there, Bhagavan Sri Krishna is saying that when the mind is no longer going after sense objects, so the sense organs are not constantly pulling the mind outwards towards sense objects, and when the sense of doership has been dropped, karmasu ana anushajjate, and when even the notion of desire or will to do karma has been given up, sarva sankalpa sannyasi, when that has been renounced, then tada yoga rudaha uchyate. Then such an individual is called yoga rudaha, or one who has attained yoga. So by the term yoga rudhatvam, Adi Shankara Bhagavad Pada in the Vivekachudamani verse is referring to supreme detachment. One has given up sense objects, the desire for sense objects, and also sankalpa, or the intention to acquire them. So one has given up all that, and therefore yoga rudatvam by lakshana refers to vairagya, and further by lakshana refers to all the sadhana chatushtaya sampatti, all the qualifications. So the direct means for moksha is samyak darshan nishtha or jnana nishtha, and the means to Jnana Nishtha is the Sadhana Chatushtaya Sampatti. With that, we will briefly stop today's session as well, and we will take the commentary to this verse in the next session. Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti